Hey everyone, welcome to another Patreon topic video. This one is for Anthony A, and it's a really cool topic. So the question is, how do we make shmups popular again? And not only did Anthony A ask this question, but he also sent me a bit of an outline of kind of ideas he'd like me to talk about, different strategies, different points. And so the first point he wants me to ask is, how do we gauge shmup popularity objectively and subjectively? So what are the metrics for gauging shmup popularity? So I'll begin by just talking about how I personally gauge shmup popularity, and I actually use two very simple metrics really. The first is I check out the views and the interest on the content we produce. So not only the views and stuff on my own channel, but also on the more established shmup channels, so Studio Mudprints, STG Weekly, Agro Sky. I always hate doing this because I'm going to miss someone. Special Demonstrations, Jamers, all the super players out there. So anyway, that's what I do, is I begin by kind of just checking how interested are people in shmups right now as far as the content we're making. And I think this has actually been really interesting because by doing this I found that I personally think there was a time where shmups were popping off a bit, were more popular, and now we're kind of in the dark ages again. Hopefully, 2020, we're gaining a little more momentum, but when you look at the view counts for all these channels, around 2010, 2011, 2012, sort of in the era where the 360 was popping off, the cave ports were coming out, Steam was just introducing shmups and stuff, there's some hype behind that. All those years have much, much higher view counts, up to like 50K up to some places, compared to this year, where you look at, and last year was like the darkest of dark ages. Last year, even the most popular shmup channels, again, Studio Mudprints, SG Weekly, Special Demonstrations, Jamers, all those guys, their view counts were definitely dropped. SG Weekly and Studio Mudprints, yeah, not much higher than my own view counts, to be honest. And so it's a far cry from those days, 2012, 2011, when they were getting these massive amounts of views. And so what's causing that? Well, I think the shmup fad has sort of ended. I think there was a bit of a shmup fad again in that era where, they're getting a lot of mainstream coverage. That's another objective measurement I use: how much mainstream coverage is the genre getting from places outside, the usual suspects. And they were getting all kinds of different articles, smaller websites. These games were getting a lot more attention in the 360 days than they are now. Where you look at Destiny, who covered Destiny? Eurogamer and myself, basically, right? That was basically the only coverage I can think of. I'm sure there's, other people out there, but that was mainly the only coverage I saw. I was really hoping that Destiny would spark some more interest again, but nada. So that's my first way of gauging objective stuff. And then the second way is by checking sales, checking the money. Are people spending money on the genre or not? I think that's another huge way to check. Is there seem to be any kind of cash flow? M2, I do not think, let's look at M2 for instance, I do not think, of course you can't really pin down the sales numbers for a lot of stuff. Sometimes you can ask an indie dev and they might just tell you, but like the major studios, they're not going to, or the bigger studios, they're not going to give you their sales numbers, and they're not. The thing is the sale numbers are so low that like sales charting and stuff, and like Steam doesn't really give you much information there, because I figure the sales are so low they don't even really track them that well. From what I remember, I think you can kind of look around on Steam a bit and see how many people own it and how many people play it, how active is it on Steam. That's another good way to do it. And I think, if I recall correctly, it's been a while, but I looked into this last year, and I believe Death Smiles was probably the most successful of all the Steam game, or all the cave games that came to the West. I think Death Smiles was it, sales-wise. And I think that has much more to do with its controversy and notoriety than it does the game itself, as much as I love Death Smiles, a great game, but I think that was the major thing for its sales boost, to be honest. Everyone was talking about it, but not for necessarily only the gameplay, right? And so that's one thing I do to check. another thing you can do is, again, see how many people are playing the games. Sometimes that can get a little depressing. I remember I checked Dan 3 and I was literally the only one playing it for a while there. And so, yeah, when you look at the activity of Shmups on Steam, unfortunately I wish the PS4 and all that had better tracking. And of course a lot of people play on emulator and stuff, there's no way to track that either. So that would be cool to track that more. But anyway, getting back to M2, tracking the sales, tracking how people are buying shmups, who are buying shmups, and for what reasons. And I think you can see that mostly shmups still remain sort of in that collecting category, rather than being a big point of sale for like competitive gamers or speedrunners. You know, the crossover just really isn't there right now. There's a few people who cross over here and there, but I tried a lot last year to make that happen, and hopefully with AGDQ and everything, and Gus and everything, that we're starting to gain a little bit of ground there, but up until that point the crossover wasn't very good. So, and another bad sign is M2 isn't even bothering to localize the games anymore. So Battle Garega got an English localization. Another one might have as well. I know Garega definitely did. But, you know, Destiny, all the new ones coming out, Esperade, there's no English localizations, or whatever, Western localizations, whatever you want to call it. That's not a good sign. That's basically saying they give up on free money from other regions, because really how much cost does it take to localize these games? I'm sure there's a bit, but you know what I mean. It's not like they're localizing an RPG with thousands of lines of dialogue or anything. It really can't be that hard or that time consuming. So, I mean, if there was any sort of monetary reason to do that, I'm sure they would. So that's a really bad sign in my opinion as far as sales. And honestly, judging by kind of reading between the lines of that M2 that My Life in Gaming did, the Shot Triggers team, they interviewed them, it kind of sounded like they were doing it purely out of passion, and basically M2 are tolerating it. They're like, okay, you know what I mean? They're like doing Shot Triggers a bit of a favor by allowing them to continue, but it's more definitely of a project of passion than any sort of monetary reward or any like viability. I think it might sustain itself, but it might not either. It's probably costing them more money. That's my suspicion. I don't know. I think that is true as well, because when you look at the marketing, that's another thing I check for, is how's the marketing for games. That kind of gives you an idea of the budget or the potential, right? And shmup marketing is horrifically bad. I think the best shmup marketing I've seen is when people like Dunkey just shout out Zero Ranger. I think that did more for marketing than like these developers and stuff like that, or these publishers, I mean. So those are the kind of things I check for when I'm checking for shmup popularity objectively. I think they're all good metrics. You know, social engagement, who are you spending money, who are you playing the games. Those are kind of the three metrics I use, and hopefully I'm seeing a bit of an upswing in that, hopefully, with 2020, with AGDQ and all this stuff. Kind of, we've got a little bit of momentum here. The views are picking up slightly, my channel's picking up. I'm hoping everyone else is picking up as well. It's hard to tell. So there's my first response to his first question. I love how he gave me an outline, because it gives me a lot of meat to dig into. So the second question, I love this question, is what can ordinary folks within the shmup scene do to help promote the genre and get it bigger? I think this is an excellent question, because I think people in general, but also shmup people, tend to look towards some sort of authority figures or bigger sources to sort of do the things, right? So we're looking at bigger YouTubers, or we're looking at even maybe people like myself to do stuff, which I am trying to do, but I'm not an army of one. And I actually love this question, because there is a lot that the average shmupper can do. Definitely number one is start promoting shit, like on your Twitters, retweet stuff, like stuff, engage in stuff, basically. Watch videos, share them, spread them around, you know, make some sort of activity, because shmups are kind of bad about activity as far as accessibility outside our own little circles, right? So, like for instance, promoting I think I've said this in another video, like shmup people are pretty bad about promoting content, to be honest. Like the new, and it's not just my own stuff, like the new SGG Weekly episode comes out, I retweet it, maybe 2 other people retweet it. It's like, okay, I know there's more than 3 of us that are fans of SGG Weekly. Why aren't more of us retweeting stuff? Like, just that kind of thing. I don't know what it is. I think it's mostly because I kind of like to imagine the shmup scene as like a dance floor in high school, where no one's really out on the dance floor, and so everyone is sort of hesitant to make any sort of moves, right? But a thriving scene, stuff like the fighting game scene, speedrunning, you got a lot of people out on the dance floor, so people don't feel as self-conscious getting in there and doing stuff. Melee is a great example of that as well. And so I think shmups need to start doing that. People just need to start doing things, putting themselves out there. And the tough part is that like I said, we're in a really dry climate right now as far as views and popularity. So Juju Kenobi's amazing DOJ chaining guide, right? I love that. It's not going to get many views and stuff, not because it isn't amazing, but because the climate is just not there. And especially it's for a hardcore crowd. And so it's not going to be really viewed by the casual people, even with my own content. Like when I make hardcore style content, it doesn't get as well viewed as sort of the more broad content. But you got to do both, right? So even though the more broad content gets viewed, I still got to work the hardcore content in there for the meat, right? And so I think that's something people need to keep in mind, is you got to persevere through the lack of viewership if you're working on stuff, because you're probably not going to get many views. And this is where people helping each other out comes into play, right? Where Juju Kenobi makes a tutorial video, all the DOJ fans should just retweet that instantly. Like, in my opinion, again, I'm speaking like strategically. If you don't want to, you don't have to. But I'm saying strategically, what should you do? You should retweet that. You should comment on it, talk about it, create activity around it, so that it gains. You'll be surprised when things have, like Shmup Slam was like this. I didn't want Shmup Slam to stay on Twitch for too long, because what would happen is everyone would watch it on Twitch and be like, okay, I watched Shmup Slam, and then when it comes out on YouTube, it'll get like 3-4 views. And what YouTube does is when you put out a video and no one views it, it goes, okay, this is garbage, and never recommends it, never promotes it. It gets in the naughty pile. And so I didn't want that to happen with the Shmup Slam videos, so that's why I hurried them to YouTube as fast as possible, so that when people wanted to watch them, like, oh, I missed Shmup Slam, I'm gonna watch it, they watch it on YouTube, and so then it gains that little bit of momentum. And even, it doesn't have to be a lot of views, even like 100 views goes a long, long way. That's the issue we have with super plays, actually. So you're wondering, why should I watch someone super play? Well, strategically, if you watch someone super play, it has a better chance of being seen by other people. So when like Moglar does a Ket Oro 2 all, I try and watch it. Like, even if I'm busy, I might even just watch like the first half and just leave it playing, because I'm trying to make YouTube recognize this is good, so that when other people type in Ketsui, that video might come up rather than just some casual video that's, you know, not part of the community. So that's something you can definitely do as the average person, is watch these videos, watch the videos you care about, play them through, create activity around them, retweet stuff. That goes a really long way. So, and when people gang up and start doing it, I mean, it makes a lot of momentum. So that's my answer to that question. So the third question is, what are some bigger long-term actions that larger members of the community like myself, or developers, or even ordinary people can take to help the genre grow in a larger way? So we talked about the short term right here of engagement, retweeting, liking, commenting, sharing. Like, that goes a long way. But what can we do in the long term? I'll try not to get too much on my soapbox here, but there's a lot of stuff that you can do as far as helping the genre in the long term. The thing is that with long-term projects, obviously it does take some sort of organization usually, and this is where, you know, I'm not going to try and get on my soapbox too much, but we have a lot of long-term problems that I, have many various projects addressing. And so step one is you need to start thinking in the long term, which most people I interact with online do not. And there's so many examples of this. The glitch bounty, there's an example. When we were starting that up, everyone for a long time was like, no, this won't work. This is stupid. what's the point? You know, that negativity. They're not thinking long term. And then of course, once you get close, it's like, well, what's it matter? It's just DDP. It doesn't matter. Like, you got to start thinking long term and saying that like every step you make builds on itself. And momentum isn't like 1. It'll start to grow and grow and grow. It's just those starting phases that are really hard. Another example is when I talked about updating the Shmup Farm leaderboards when I was early in the community. I think it was like a year and a half ago now, or a year. It was a long time ago. It was, one of my first major contributions to the Shmup scene, and it was totally disregarded. There were some people in my original Discord who were really supportive, like Plasmo and stuff, Cloudy Music, Jamers, the usual suspects, right? The homies. But but the farm itself was very dismissive of this idea, and they're like, no, our leaderboards are wonderful and perfect, even though everyone complains about them all the time and they never get updated, and there's all these issues, and we don't even have video, connections to any of the scores, so they're just numbers, and then when the table gets expired, we just make a new table, so we're losing hundreds of scores over years that no one can ever find. Check DDP if you don't believe me. It's a mess, and then of course, the moderator goes on vacation for 2 months, your score doesn't get updated for 2 months. It's just a Wild West mess, and I made that whole post about it. But the bigger issue is people don't think in the long term. They just think, that sounds like a lot of work, and I don't see any short-term gains here, so what's the point? So when you start thinking about long term, you need to start thinking about the future, infrastructure, just changing that thinking of being short-term. So the big thing is when you hear about different ideas, different projects, people talking about things, don't immediately just turn to, okay, what's this going to do for me next week? Start thinking, okay, how is this going to help the genre in the long run? And I'm going to have some upcoming projects that will definitely be an opportunity there if people want to help the genre in the long term. So yeah, that's my reply to that. Kind of a complicated one, but just keep tuned. I'll have more to say about that. And so lastly, how do we know if the genre is gaining popularity? Can this be measured objectively at all? It kind of ties back to question 1. Is there some sort of tracker or monitor we can monitor month to month? That's a really great question. So what can we be monitoring to see if the genre is growing at all? So this is what I've been doing after Gus's run, right? It's a perfect example, right? Before Gus's run at AGDQ, I feel like we were in the Shmup Dark Ages. We kind of still are, but we have a bit of an opportunity now because of his huge showing there. So what can we keep an eye on to see if that opportunity is growing or if we're going backwards? Like I said before, keeping an eye on our content and keeping an eye on our numbers is a great way to start. So just keeping an eye on everyone's content, see if they're getting more or less viewers. For instance, my channel like tripled or something after Gus's run because of the new eyes on the genre. So yeah, that's definitely gaining popularity there. I think other people too, not just myself, gained viewers, I know Gus himself, right? And I've just noticed on Twitch too, I'm checking Twitch streams and seeing, okay, are the Shmup streamers getting views? And they seem like to be getting views compared to last year. So just checking all these different metrics, that would be cool if there was like a universal popularity metric we could just check to see, okay, is this genre growing now? Another thing I keep an eye on is my Discord numbers. So my Discord has been growing a lot. It's pretty amazing. So it's like, okay, and a lot of people showing up are saying, I have a part of my Discord, I really want to hear why people join it, because I'm actually trying to gather this information, right? I'm trying to gather, why are people joining my Discord? What's the motivation here? How did they find it? Basically gathering data. And a lot of people are saying they are newish to Shmups, or they're sort of returning. And I think that last one is very interesting, that we're resurrecting old fans who may have been dormant. And so I'm starting to think that the genre is a bit bigger, or maybe even quite a bit bigger than we all realize, but we have just a lot of dormant fans who basically probably got bored of the scene and the infrastructure and all the issues there, or they just didn't have a reason to really get that engaged. But with Gus, with Shmup Slam, there's like, okay, there's things happening now that make people say, okay, wait a minute here. There's something actually going on that I might want to pay attention to. So the Discord numbers, I check to see why people are joining. Another one is keeping an eye on Shmup releases and Shmup and like new IPs and stuff like that. So already this year we're seeing quite a bit of Shmup activity as far as games being made and released. And that's a really good sign too. That's one of the bigger metrics because it shows there's some sort of financial viability to the genre, which I think is one of the most important reasons for what we're doing, right? Beyond just interacting and having a cool place to hang out and everything, I think another big one is making this genre financially sustainable so we can continue to receive awesome games. And the only way you can do that is if you have a fan base, right? So that's another metric I like to check to see if, if we're getting games coming out, or, and it looks like it's positive in that regard. I actually just reviewed a new game that, I'll post a review soon, but so yeah, I think that's another cool thing to keep an eye on. Maybe some other things is if we're seeing any sort of crossover with other communities that are becoming aware of us, that's another healthy sign, because I think most communities grow through crossover with other ones. That's really hard to actually accomplish, as I found out. It takes a lot. It takes a little bit of a romance or something to make it happen, right? Where the other community sort of needs to feel this pull towards your genre innately. That happened with Melee, with a lot of like I can't remember what they're called, like Dota players and all that back in the day, where I can't remember what the hell, the League of Legends and all those types, like Melee really appealed to them, and so Melee had a huge fan base among that crowd of people, and then their esports team started picking up Melee players. That's who was picking them up mostly. It wasn't just fighting game people. It was also like Cloud9 and, I don't really know these games that well, but I think TSM's another one, right? They're picking up Melee players because they, it was like cool to them. So I'm hoping Shmups can kind of do that, especially with fighting games. I think fighting game players like Daigo, right? Kamui's demonstration with at Daigo's tournament, right? That's the perfect example of what I'm talking about, where we can kind of become their little pets, their little side projects and stuff, and then hopefully grow even more in our own right. I'm hoping that happens with AGDQ as well, where we establish a bit of a side project status there, and then we can continue to grow and hopefully create something more solid in the future. So I think that's a great way to check health as well, see if other scenes are interested in what we're doing or not. So yeah, I think that's a very complicated subject. I hope I did it justice, Anthony, and before I go, let me thank my patrons. So thanks to Joe Angelo, John, Kay, Quentin, Mark Sloan, Maz, Nathaniel Davis, N Electron, Okla Kugels, Omcall, Rhizosis, Sugumo, Young Money Swee, Plasmo, Utakaya, Bahoy TV 100, Malaise, Meher Calendrian, Dingo, Anthony A, Ben Wynn, Brian Shiver, Double Vision, Depths 20XX, Dunpeel 2064, Ek 2151, Full Set, Retro Shmupper, Gus, Kiwi, Jacob Spring, Jake Ryan, and thanks again to the man of the video, Anthony A. Thanks for watching.